This video was made possible by Skillshare. Start learning new skills for free for 2 months at skl.sh/HAI28. North Dakota is the type of place most people don't know much about. If you were to ask a random person on the street to name a fact about North Dakota, they'd probably say to you, "Hey man, it's really weird that you came up to me on the street and demanded that I tell you a fact about North Dakota." If you really push them, the best answer they'd be likely to muster is that North Dakota is located north of South Dakota. But despite its oft-overlooked status, North Dakota is much more than just a sparsely populated hat that sits on South Dakota's head. It has the nation's lowest unemployment rate, it's where the world's largest hamburger was eaten, it produces most of the wheat that's in American-made pasta, and there's probably other interesting stuff about it too beyond the first 3 Google results for North Dakota facts. For example, until recently, it may not have been a state at all. To understand why, we have to first look at Article 6 of the US Constitution, which says, "The members of several state legislators and all executive and judicial officers, both of the United States and of the several states, shall be bound by oath or affirmation to support this Constitution." While that might be less readable than Moby Dick, what that section means is actually pretty simple. State officers from all 3 branches of government, legislative, executive, and judicial, have to take an oath that they will support the US Constitution. But here's the problem. Until recently, the North Dakota state constitution didn't require its executive officers, like the governor, to take an oath of office. That may seem like a minor issue, but if there's one thing autocorrect has taught us, it's that small mistakes can have a big impact. Because of that omission, some experts agree that North Dakota didn't actually meet the qualifications for statehood, which means that, until the state constitution was fixed, it was never actually a state. Now, to be clear, not everyone agrees with that argument. After all, when it comes to the US Constitution, getting everyone to agree is kind of like trying to have a nuanced debate in a YouTube comment section. It's scientifically impossible. Some constitutional scholars agree that while North Dakota's state constitution did violate Article 6, that doesn't mean it wasn't a state, as violating Article 6 doesn't affect Congress's power to admit states to the Union, which is laid out in Article 4, which says, "New states may be admitted by the Congress into this Union, but no new state shall be formed or erected within the jurisdiction of any other state, nor any state be formed by the junction of 2 or more states or parts of state without the consent of the legislators of the state concerned, as well as of the Congress." That section gives Congress the power to make new states and says not to put a state inside of another state or to combine or separate states without their permission. If only the British and French believed in this whole not dividing pre-existing states thing when they took out the Creoles and drew a bunch of arbitrary borders around the Middle East leading to much of the ethnic and geopolitical conflicts of today. Oh, sorry, too much? Those aforementioned restrictions are the only ones on Congress's state-making power, except, of course, for the unofficial rule of no shirt, no shoes, too many Democrats, not enough swing votes, no statehood. Damn, who would have thought this politics-related video would get so political? Given that Congress's power to make states is so broad, the question is, because Congress said North Dakota is a state, does that mean it is a state regardless of whether or not it violated the Constitution? Normally, the answer would likely be yes, it's still a state. After all, states violate the US Constitution sort of all the time. When they do, there's a lawsuit and it gets taken to the courts. For example, if Texas amended their state constitution to require everyone to always root for the Dallas Cowboys, that would violate freedom of expression and thus the US Constitution, and the Supreme Court would strike it down, but that would just mean that the people in Texas don't have to cheer for the Cowboys, not that Texas wasn't a state. In other words, the argument goes, the issue of statehood and constitutional compliance are separate. But here's where things get tricky. North Dakota's statehood issue doesn't stop with Article 6. See, the original law that made North Dakota a state was something called the Enabling Act of 1889, and Section 4 of that act declared that in order to become a state, North Dakota must make a state constitution, which they did, but also that, quote, "the state constitution shall not be repugnant to the Constitution of the United States," which is where we run into problems. That's because, by violating Article 6 of the US Constitution, one could argue that the North Dakota state constitution was, in fact, repugnant to the Constitution of the United States. It just depends on your definition of repugnant. Something I might call repugnant, other people might call Taco Bell. But, if we believe that violating Article 6 is sufficiently repugnant, that would mean that not only did North Dakota violate Article 6 of the US Constitution, but by doing so, it also failed to meet the qualifications for statehood set out by the Enabling Act of 1889, which was supposed to make it a state, and because of that, its statehood has always been illegitimate. Ultimately, the issue is now moot. A North Dakota historian named John Rosinski noticed the problem in 1995 and spent the next 17 years lobbying the state legislator, or I suppose what was then the territorial legislator, to fix it. Eventually, in 2011, a North Dakota legislator took up his cause and got a constitutional amendment put on the ballot, which was approved in 2012. So not to worry, North Dakota is definitely a state now, which means we can all go back to treating it the way we always have, ignoring it completely. You know, all these problems probably could have been avoided if only the writers of the North Dakota Constitution were just better. You see, part of the issue was probably that back then they didn't have Skillshare. That's because Skillshare's writing courses, whether Storytelling 101, Creative Writing for All, or Creative Nonfiction, each help you hone your writing skills, which can help you at work, at school, or just with your own projects. Effective writing is just one of the countless skills you can learn with any of Skillshare's tens of thousands of courses. A membership to Skillshare is quite reasonable. It works out to less than $10 a month, but by going to skl.sh/HAI28, you'll get 2 months completely for free, and you'll even be helping support Half as Interesting.